Now, one of the issues that came up in my writing and assembling the sayings of Yeshua for the Gospel of Yeshua was the issue of how Yeshua's missionary preaching journey, was it just 1 year or less, or was it 3 years long? That has been hotly debated by many scholars for many reasons, and I want to show you the issue involved in that and what I decided to do in order to resolve it. Now, the Gospels disagree. According to the Gospels of Mark, Matthew, and Luke, which are the Synoptic Gospels, many biblical critical scholars would agree that Jesus' public life seems to be no longer than 1 year. And looking at Mark's Gospel, the least elaborated and the earliest, some postulate that all the major events in Jesus' ministry happened within a few months. Many prominent 2nd and 3rd and 4th century Christians, such as St. Clement of Alexandria in the 2nd century, also called for a 1-year ministry. Eusebius of Caesarea, in the History of the Church published in the 4th century, says, "For it is evident that the three evangelists, meaning the synoptic evangelists, recorded only the deeds done by the Savior for 1 year after the imprisonment of John the Baptist." And in this thing I'm quoting from the site called The Historical Jesus, normally a pious Jesus with no obligation and having high regard for the temple, his most direct followers, the Nazarenes, certainly did, would be expected to go to Jerusalem for each Passover. But during his public life, only one trip for Passover is reported in the Gospel of Mark and the Synoptics, Matthew and Luke, which followed Mark. And here's some of the arguments for the Synoptics. The support of a 1-year ministry of Jesus was widely known among the early church fathers. This is a map that maps out the places that Jesus is described as being in during that period of time. Now, Clement of Alexandria reported the disciples of Basilides placed the baptism of Jesus in the 15th year of Tiberius and the crucifixion in the 16th year. So that's a 1-year period. Irenaeus said the Valentinians preached a ministry of 1 year, and this was based on Jesus reading from Isaiah at the synagogue in Nazareth and proclaiming the favorable year of the Lord. That was an assumption or an interpretation that was made about the history and chronology of Jesus, based not really on any kind of facts, but just on an interpretation of an Old Testament supposed prediction of the coming of Yeshua. Now, Clement in the Stromata affirmed that he was to preach for a year only. That is laid down in the scriptures in the words, "to preach the acceptable year of the Lord who sent me." And that's how it was interpreted. Now, Origen followed Clement's position, and the list goes on to include Tertullian, Lactantius, Philastrius, Gaudentius, Evagrius, Orosius, and Ephraim. Now, in this place that I'm giving you, the New Testament Chronology, published by the Edmund Mellon Press and authored by Kenneth Frank Doig, he says, "A few modern scholars have continued to pursue a 1-year ministry. The main argument is that there was only a first and last Passover. The second Passover, in John 6:4, is claimed as neither primitive nor genuine, and this claim is based primarily on the omission in Codex 472 in the Library of Lambeth Palace, which dates to the 13th to 15th centuries, New Testament chronology, and so on, by this fellow." And there's further argument. Scholars have become well agreed upon the year 30 AD for the crucifixion. This is the date which we now find in the writings of scholars generally. I'm quoting here. Recently, some first-class scholars have recurred to a different chronology, which leads them instead to assign the crucifixion to 29 AD. Turner, who is one of my dissertation teachers, by the way, in the Hastings Dictionary of the Bible, agrees with Sandy, with Holtzman, Ramsey, and Idler that, quote, nearly all the fathers of the first 3 centuries, particularly the Latins, accepted this date, 29 AD. This is written in the Chronology of Jesus' Public Ministry by Claude Votow from the University of Chicago Press. Now, John's Gospel, which talks about 3 different Passover, although one of the Passovers is questionable, whether it was named even as a Passover or just a visit to Jerusalem. Now, John's Gospel is not a chronological document. It begins with the cleansing of the temple, which belongs at the end of the ministry, chronologically, of Jesus, as in the Synoptics, and was the cause for Yeshua's arrest. So it makes no sense to say that that's the first thing that he does. And John's Gospel was thematic and composed to be read at assemblies, and was not an attempt to be chronological or history. I described how John uses the Jewish feasts as a backdrop for his stories of Jesus and suggested that a chronological reading misses the point. Like the book of Revelation, another document in the Johannine corpus, the order of events may be thematic rather than chronological. The temple cleansing in today's verse, for example, surely occurred in Jesus' final Passover, not 2 years before. It is, in fact, the trigger for the arrest of Jesus. And I'm quoting again from the dubious disciple, which is how you can go to. Could there have been 2 attacks on the temple by Jesus, one 2 years before the other? Or should we recognize John's literary creativity in reordering of the events and side with the other 3 Gospels for about a 1-year ministry? I vote for the latter. Now, there's another point of view. John's Gospel. However, the Gospel of John implies a longer ministry because it reports 3 Passovers in Jesus' public life. One at the start, John 2:13, the cleansing of the temple. One in the middle, John 6.40, that's in dispute. And one at the very end, John 12:1. Additionally, on Pentecost, Peter in the Act quotes the prophet Joel, who said, the sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. And then Peter goes on to say, Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God among you by miracles and wonders and signs which God did by him in the midst of you, as you yourselves know, etc. We'll find this in the daily Bible study of the Jesus Ministry. Humphreys and Waddington quote New Testament scholar F.F. Bruce in interpreting this as referring to a lunar eclipse on the night of the crucifixion, because in a lunar eclipse the moon appears to be red, particularly if it is just rising. Humphreys and Waddington, early in the century, calculated the dates of all 12 lunar eclipses visible in Jerusalem between 36 and 26 and 36. One of the lunar eclipses fell on the night of April 3rd, AD 33, and the moon would have been partially eclipsed as it was rising and thus could very well have been dark red. Now, by this method of dating, Jesus' ministry began not too long after fall, AD 29, and lasted until 43 days after April 3rd, AD 33. I've investigated this conclusion in a previous presentation, pre-C 14 on dating, and which you can look at and look at the arguments for. Here's some more arguments for John's view of the long ministry, the 3.5 or 3-year ministry. Now, this is the accepted view of a 3-year ministry. This is the way we think of the of Yeshua and his ministry is a 3-year ministry. The Gospel of John refers to 2 actual Passovers, one at the beginning of Jesus' ministry and the second at the end of Jesus' ministry. There's a 3rd reference to Passover that many claim is a 3rd actual festival, but this cannot be supported. It's more likely to be a forecasting of the 2nd Passover in the Gospel of John. If we look in Wikipedia under the ministry of Jesus, this 3rd reference to a Passover in the Gospel of John is why many suggest that Jesus' ministry was a period of about 3 years. Scholars that support the 3-year ministry, such as evangelical Kostenberger, state that the Gospel of John simply provides a more detailed account. Here's one of Kostenberger's books. It's called The Cradle, the Cross, and the Crown. He does take the conservative viewpoint on all these things, actually the evangelical viewpoint. He teaches at an evangelical seminary. Another evangelical statement. In John's Gospel, Jesus attended at least 3 annual Passover feasts. At the shortest, his ministry would have been 2.5 years. If one additional Passover occurred during this time, sometime between John 2 and 6, the information regarding 3.5 years fits nicely. In fact, this unmentioned Passover likely took place prior to the 3 occasions mentioned in John. By the time of the first Passover mentioned in John 2:13, Jesus had been baptized, spent 40 days being tempted in the wilderness, had started preaching in various towns and villages, as in Matthew 4:17, selected his first followers, that's in John 1:35 and following, performed his first miracle at Cana in Galilee, as in John, and traveled to Capernaum, north of the Sea of Galilee, as in John's 2nd chapter. These efforts would have covered the course of several months, adding enough time to easily fit the 3.5 years mentioned above. Now, what is my opinion about all this? First of all, there is no solid evidence for the length of Yeshua's ministry, whether it was long or short. That's simply the case. All the rest of this is speculation and opinion. Mark seems to indicate only a few months because he isn't writing history, and the later Matthew and Luke treated his lack of chronology as history. The early church fathers assumed the length was less than a year based on the synoptic chronology, and their interpretation of Isaiah, that a Messiah, which they interpret as Yeshua the Messiah, would be active for a year. As the Johannine Gospel gained acceptance, and it took a while longer for it to be accepted, its 3, actually only 2 named Passovers, convinced the later church scholars that the ministry was much longer. The 3, only 2 really named Passovers became the standard from John's Gospel, and the chronology of 2 to 3.5 years for Yeshua's ministry became Roman Catholic Church dogma. Now, this was accepted much later by Irish primate Ussher, or spelled sometimes with 2 S's, whose scholarly influence set the tone for Protestants. Scholars have argued for everything from short to long, invoking methods like counting the number of miracles per week to show it couldn't have been long, even though the Johannine miracles were said to be only a few of them, or like using Roman dating or the Jewish year and the dating of Yeshua's ministry from AD 28 or 30 to 31 or AD 33 or 34 to show it couldn't have been short. In my opinion, none of these subjective chronologies, especially the evangelical and fundamentalist claims for 3.5 years, are viable. I think his ministry was probably about a year, based on harmonizing the Johannine and synoptic views, which has been done by scholars, and it works out pretty well that way. In my Gospel of Yeshua, I simply present teachings in their life settings, private or public, with no attempt to forge a chronology through narratives. My narratives are mainly introductory and at the end, foregoing any order but these. So my Gospel of Yeshua does not present a chronology. It simply presents the teachings in various life settings. Now, the Gospel of Yeshua is available in bookstores now as an ebook or paperback. It can be purchased as an ebook or paperback for $9.99 at Amazon or Kindle. And you can go to this site to get the information, or you can search Kaiser, the Gospel of Yeshua, not to be confused with several others, because there are many Yeshua Gospels or Gospels of Yeshua, but they are not necessarily vetted as authentic and historical sayings of Yeshua, as mine are. So this is the one you want if you want a simple and easy access to the actual historical authentic teachings of Yeshua, translated in their own terms, in their own idioms, with copious footnotes and things, but easily accessible to anybody who can read English. So you simply go to lewiskaiser@gmail.com and send me an email, because I've ordered 10 copies, author's copies, and I will send them to you for as a paperback for $15, and we can work out the details by email. Thank you.